I like to think that I have a somewhat higher opinion of Michael Bay than most people. Not that there aren't valid reasons to criticize his work, there's no shortage of those, but I do enjoy most of his movies, albeit to varying degrees. But even by my standards, there was a period from a few years ago where it seemed like any credibility he had disappeared. His attempts to create an interesting story and characters to break up all the explosions and car chases were already teetering on non-existent, but starting from Transformers Age of Extinction and continuing into Transformers The Last Knight, it seemed like he had completely stopped trying.
Of all the Earls I have had the pleasure to serve, you are by far the coolest.
But me wanting to give the benefit of the doubt was still slightly interested in his next movie, the Netflix exclusive, The Ridiculous Six.
If Frank Stockburn is your father, raise your hand.
Oh, dang!
I mean, Six Underground. You might think this was me being foolishly optimistic, but in my defense, I had reason to think this might be good. This was Bay's first movie since stepping down from directing almost nothing but Transformers films for 10 years. And the couple of other movies he's made in that time are generally regarded as some of the better movies he's made. Well, relatively anyway, you still have to put up with shit like this.
Would you like one? Those are so cute, they're like little edible penises. I wish they had them in the strip club.
But that made me think, maybe Six Underground wouldn't be so bad. Maybe some distance from Transformers is exactly what Bay's career needed. It turned out to be the worst Michael Bay movie I'd ever seen. This movie was awful. Imagine if the incoherent, flippant laziness that the Transformers movies eventually devolved into continued to go unchecked. That's this movie. I realize that's a big claim to make and I'll need to back it up, so let's take a look at Six Underground and start digging. The plot stars Ryan Reynolds as MacLeod S. Johnson, the leader of a team of highly skilled vigilantes who fake their deaths in order to anonymously travel around the world, taking down evil people in positions of power. Their first target, Rovak Alamov, a war criminal dictator of the fictional nation of Turkestan. Their plan being to ignite a coup, overthrow him and his military, and restore democracy to the country. So, I've held this back long enough. It's time to start talking about the movie's actual quality, starting with the opening scene, which is a complete piece of surprisingly good action. I'm not kidding, the first 20 minutes of this movie are genuinely pretty well done. The film opens with a car chase through Florence, Italy, which features some good cinematography, music, sound design, and slow motion. The sequence is very fast-paced and has some fun set pieces like driving through a museum, shooting construction pipes through windshields, parkouring on tall buildings, and they even work a skateboard into the mix. And say what you want about Michael Bay, but the man knows how to film a good car crash. But while I'll admit that this scene is entertaining, it's ultimately quite shallow. We've only just met these characters and we haven't had much of a chance to get to know them or understand what's at stake. There are a couple of narrative threads throughout the scene, like one of the characters is bleeding out and has to be operated on, and Magnet hacking the villain's phone. It could be really nerve-wracking to see these characters try to do these really difficult things during an already stressful and chaotic situation, but if I don't know this character who's bleeding out or understand why Magnet is hacking this phone, what am I getting out of this? Of course, you could introduce these characters by showing how they act in extreme situations like this. You can show each of their differing attitudes in a crisis, what their strengths and weaknesses are, and show us what makes them either likable or unlikable. But instead, we get the same thing that passes for chemistry in most of Michael Bay's movies.
I'm fucking serious! You squish it, the mission's over! I don't speak that! Don't you squish it, you motherfucker! Don't speak that either.
Everybody just yells and screams at each other. Nobody's civil anymore.
There's no warmth or camaraderie and no conflict between anyone that goes any deeper than Ryan Reynolds making sarcastic comments to Dave Franco.
Is the David the one with the really small...
Yep, that's it.
You want to get out and compare, or should we maybe think about going?
And after the action ends, any enjoyment that I was initially having quickly fizzles out as the characters and plot don't get much better. Magnet's backstory is that before faking his death, he was a billionaire who witnessed a terrorist attack while visiting Turkestan for charity work. but the way the movie depicts this just makes his desire to save the world feel completely unconvincing. He's depicted as being pretty apathetic towards the charity he's working with, only doing it for the reason billionaires usually work with charities, because it's good PR.
I am going to take some shots on some kids, hopefully not too sick, nothing too depressing, no amputees, that sort of stuff.
Then when he witnesses the bombing, his attitude instantly changes and he's suddenly all broken up about it. I could at least understand if there was something specific about the attack that he was devastated by. Like maybe someone he cared about got killed, or there was actually some focus on the suffering of the citizens. Instead, the movie just sort of vaguely gestures toward the idea of terrorism being bad, and that serves as the crux for his entire character motivation. I mean, the movie's not wrong, obviously, but I'm kind of looking for something a little more specific to him. His character in the present doesn't fare much better. The main flaw that he's meant to overcome is that he refuses to open up emotionally to the other members of his team for fear of prioritizing them over the mission or compromising their anonymity.
Stop the car.
No, don't stop the car. We're leaving him.
What? No.
He's on his own.
The problem with this is that, again, these characters don't get any chemistry with each other. All they do is make snarky quips to each other without ever properly getting to know one another. And while Ryan Reynolds is doing his best to make this role work, he doesn't have much characterization beyond essentially just playing Deadpool again, with the same writers and everything. You know, just without the depth, sympathy, or actually good jokes that made Deadpool likable.
Fake laugh, hiding real pain.
The rest of the squad members are all horrifically underdeveloped in their own rights too. The most prominent one being Blaine, a former soldier who joined the team after his superiors in the military ordered him to let the enemy kill his comrades. But the movie makes no attempt to characterize those dead soldiers or give him a personal connection with any of them, so his survivor's guilt and desire to get revenge isn't explored all that thoroughly. Most of the other squad members can basically have their entire backstory summed up in one sentence, so they're not particularly interesting either. The only character who manages to garner a grain of sympathy is Javier, a former hitman looking for redemption after killing a father and alienating himself from his family.
I won't speak to Javier anymore. This is a murder.
There's a shred of motivation in there, but even then it's not given that much attention. The movie itself is also a tonal mess. There are so many moments that are meant to be emotional or dramatic, but they just end up getting undercut by silly, poorly timed jokes. One example being this scene early on when the squad are paying respect to Dave Franco's character after his death. Initially, the scene is reasonably somber, and the characters take the situation seriously.
Did he have a family? I think you're looking at it. All of us.
But then they just can't help themselves, and the conversation ends like this.
Leave It to Beaver?
Leave It to Beaver?
Jerry Mathers?
No.
Tony Dow?
Never heard of it.
No, nobody watches Nick at Night.
This is honestly just incompetent writing. There's no other way of putting it. You don't need to be an Oscar-winning writer to understand that a tragic emotional moment is kind of gonna be undercut if the characters start discussing sitcoms halfway through it. You were my brother, Anakin. We were like Drake and Josh. Or there's this other scene not long after where Blaine is watching his own funeral from afar after faking his death. It could have been a potentially powerful moment where he watches his friends and family give tearful speeches about him as he takes in the fact that he's never gonna see them again. But instead, Michael Bay seems to think it would be better to have his friends do a stand-up routine.
None of us know how we would react if we were put in the same position he was. I would have shot the motherfuckers. I would have blown their fucking heads off. That's just me.
Oh, and they also throw in another pop culture reference because, of course, they fucking do.
Should have seen him watching Coco. Puddle of tears.
But the biggest problem with the movie is just the total disinterest it seems to have in actually telling a story. There is some level of plot structure to the team's mission and how each step of their plan leads to the next. For example, the opening car chase follows the characters after interrogating a lawyer for information on Rovach's generals. This then leads them to those generals, which in turn leads them to Rovach. But the plot suffers from a severe lack of context, which makes it feel structureless even if some structure does technically exist. While we do see glimpses of the war crimes that Rovach and his military have committed, we don't get to see much of the suffering that its citizens are going through. The reason why that plot structure I mentioned doesn't feel like it matters is because whenever the squad kill a high-ranking member of Rovach's military, or even when they just do anything at all, it doesn't feel like anything changes. It's worth noting that for a director who's often criticized for excessive runtimes, Six Underground is actually one of the shorter movies he's made, clocking in at just over 2 hours. And while that might seem like a more reasonable runtime, it still ends up feeling way too long because nothing of any fucking worth happens for most of the movie. It's a real shame because there are some theoretically good ideas here in terms of the action scenes. There's some legitimately creative scenarios here, like the characters fighting on a skyscraper with a collapsing swimming pool above them, or the squad using high-powered magnets during a gunfight. It's moments like these that I come to a Michael Bay movie for. For all the complaints his movies get about being lazy and derivative, there are moments like these that show he does legitimately care about being innovative, at least in certain ways. But in this case, the movie surrounding it is so boring, underdeveloped, and overall pointless that by the time these sequences come up, I'm completely fed up and can't bring myself to get invested. You see, Michael, this is what happens when you trivialize huge aspects of your movie like this, like plot and character development. It just means that when you actually get to the points of the movie that it seems you actually wanted to make, everyone watching will have long since checked out. And considering that Netflix cancelled plans for a sequel after this movie came out tells me that I'm not alone on this. Essentially, Michael Bay did to this potential franchise what it originally took him 5 movies to do with Transformers. You've really outdone yourself, Mike. Good job. Remember what I said at the beginning of this video? I have a higher opinion of Michael Bay than most people. I stand by that. Hell, even after watching 6 Underground, I stood by that. But this movie really damaged my faith in him for quite a long time. I was willing to overlook the later Transformers films and give him a chance now that that series was behind him. And then I watched this and saw that the problems from those movies hadn't gone away. If anything, they had just gotten worse. So much so that when his next movie, Ambulance, came out, I didn't see it at first. I figured that if I heard it was good, I'd give it a shot, but until then, I'm not giving him my attention on faith alone. I eventually did watch Ambulance after the reviews came out, and yeah, it was actually pretty good. But that's the thing. I said no to what ended up being one of the best movies of Michael Bay's career because he gave me no reason to suspect he still had it in him. To me, that's the biggest sin committed by 6 Underground, as well as the later Transformers movies, to be fair. But there's no point dwelling. The reasons I liked Michael Bay seem to have come back, and now we kind of just have to hope that the worst is behind us. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, consider clicking the link to my Patreon in the description below. For just $1.50 a month, you'll get access to all my videos before they get released on YouTube. You'll also get a shout out at the end of every video. And Michael, if you truly do have any more movies left in you that are more Ambulance and less 6 Underground, all I can say is, we are here. We are waiting. I get the feeling that that bit I did at the end there where I'm quoting the ending to the first Transformers movie probably isn't going to be as cool without Linkin Park playing in the background, but fuck it.